is the Sony a5100 still worth buying in 2021? As you're probably aware, the Sony a5100 is an older camera now, coming out all the way back in 2014. But somewhat surprisingly, it is still a very popular camera, and there is good reason why. In this video, I'll look at the pros and cons of picking up a Sony a5100 in 2021. I'll also include example videos and photos along the way. If you haven't seen any of my videos before, I make lots of tips and tricks videos for Sony Alpha cameras, so if that sounds like your sort of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. But now, here's the video. So, the Sony a5100 is a mirrorless APS-C camera which uses the E-mount lens system of interchangeable lenses. This means you can upgrade the lens on your camera to fit your needs and give the camera good versatility. This means that you can adapt the a5100 with lenses for telephoto photography or a better lens for portraits, for example. There is a ton of E-mount lenses out there, and it means if you ever decide to upgrade from the Sony a5100, you'll have lenses already that are compatible with other cameras from the Sony Alpha range. The camera weighs just 283 grams with dimensions of 110 by 63 by 36mm. Making this an extremely small camera, especially for an interchangeable lens camera, meaning that you can just put it in your pocket if you're tight on space, or if you just don't want to be carrying around a bulkier DSLR or mirrorless camera, as they can get quite large. Of course, this reduction in size does mean that it is lacking a few features, and for some people this would be a deal breaker. So for example, there's no EVF, which means electronic viewfinder. This means that when you're monitoring your shots and just lining up how you want to take your shots, you have to use the screen on the back. Now the screen is pretty good, and you will find in most situations it'll be absolutely fine, but in some situations, especially if it's particularly bright, shooting outside in summer for example, the screen might just be not bright enough so that you can see it. And this is where an EVF would come into its own, where you'd just be able to put your face up to the camera and be able to see through that to get your shot lined up. When you're only using the screen on the a5100, it can be a bit limiting in those situations, so definitely worth bearing in mind. Another downside attributed to its smaller size is that it does overheat quite quickly when recording video. Now, I've made a whole video explaining exactly why this happens and how you can help prevent it here, but what it does mean is after about 25 minutes, on average for me anyway, of continuous recording of video, the camera does overheat and shut down, and then it takes a few minutes before it cools down enough to keep using again. Now, obviously that isn't ideal. Now, for me, most of the time, I don't ever record videos over 25 minutes, so personally it's not been a problem. But if that is the plan, it is definitely worth bearing in mind if you are thinking of picking up an a5100. The small size also means that there are very few buttons on it. There is no shoot mode wheel on the top of the camera, which is expected on a lot of cameras. Now this might slow you down a lot because it means that you can't change your shooting modes, so that means like aperture priority mode, movie mode, or say shutter priority mode as quickly as you can do with those ones, which would just be a click of the wheel on the top. Instead, you have to go into the menus and do this. Now, it's still a pretty quick process, and I can see why they've removed this to save space, but for some people that might put them off. Another downside to the smaller size is that there isn't really many customizable buttons, or any at all really. You do have the options to customize the buttons on the camera, but there aren't really any that are specifically assigned for that process. So again, if you want to have some of your quick access buttons, features that you use more regularly, quickly available, it isn't quite as easy to do on the Sony a5100, especially compared to some of its contemporaries of the same era. So say the Sony a6000, which came out around the same time, does have options for that. The Sony a5100 does have built-in stereo mics for recording audio, which is great if you just want to get started with this camera for recording video with audio alongside it, but it doesn't have a jack input for an external microphone or a hot shoe where you would be able to attach a microphone to the top of the camera. This is a bit of a shame because you think they should be able to have had the jack input. Some of the newer Sony cameras have started including this, so they have learnt from this mistake, but on this older camera it can be a bit frustrating, especially if you want to record better quality audio. But the stereo mics are okay for a lot of situations. And it also has a built-in pop-up flash, which has a range of 4 meters. And I'm not going to talk about this too much because honestly, I don't really do a lot of flash photography, so I haven't used this feature too much, but it is there, and if you're in a pinch and you need a flash, then it's great that it's got one built in. So the video capabilities of this camera max out at 1080p at 60 frames per second, which is now starting to become a little dated when there is a lot more 4K cameras around or 120 frames per second cameras around, and even some of the more recent ones I think might even be able to do 4K or 120 frames per second, or they're certainly moving in that direction. Now, personally, for me, I find 1080p at 60 frames per second is absolutely fine for my uses. I don't really do any slow-mo videos, which 120 frames per second would help with, and 4K for my main use, which is YouTube videos, just isn't really that much of a standard across the board yet. 1080p still looks fine, and for example, the video I'm recording now, I'm using the Sony a5100, so if you think this looks pretty good, especially after all the compression that YouTube does, then you can see that, yeah, the video quality for a budget camera is still very good in 2021, despite it being a now 7-year-old camera. And that video performance is due in part to it having a 24.3 megapixel sensor, which is still very much comparable to newer cameras despite the a5100's age. And this does mean that for photography, the a5100 does hold up very well because the sensor size is just very similar to a lot of the other APS-C size Sony mirrorless cameras that are out there, even the newer ones such as the Sony a6100. If you're using the 16 to 50mm kit lens, which usually comes with the Sony a5100, you can expect pretty decent performance for photography straight out of the box. The only place where this lens particularly struggles is in low light because it doesn't have a particularly fast aperture. But as I said earlier, one of the major selling points of the Sony a5100 is the E-mount interchangeable lens system. All you would need if you want better low light performance is to pick up a faster aperture lens, so something like with an f number of say 1 to 1.6 is going to have much better low light performance, or if you want to go in the other direction and you want a really long telephoto lens, then you also have great options available in the E-mount range. Changing your lens means you can massively improve the quality of your video and photography work just by upgrading the lens, and you can keep the same body of camera, I expect, for quite a long time. Now, so I picked up the Sony a5100 in 2017, so it was already a 3-year-old camera when I started using it, and I probably didn't think that 4 years after that I'd still be using the camera quite as much as I am, but this is a testament to just how adaptive and how versatile, I suppose, the E-mount lens system is. It means that I can upgrade my lenses and really change the type of photography. I use long lens for sports and animal photography, and I use wide-angle lenses for stuff like this. I use a wider lens. And there's such a big range of lenses available at a lot of price points. You can get lenses for as cheap as around $50, or you could go all the way up to spending thousands of dollars. And you can use it all on the same body, which is a big selling point of the a5100. Another nice feature of this Sony a5100 is the screen is a flip-up 180-degree screen, which means that you can start vlogging or just monitoring yourself straight away with this camera without having to have an external monitor. A lot of other cameras of similar price points or similar age especially don't have the flip-up screen, or it certainly doesn't flip up 180 degrees so that you can monitor yourself. This is a big bonus for just being able to pick up a camera and not buy any extras and get started straight away with vlogging or making YouTube channels, which is a big use case for a camera like this. Another nice feature of the camera is that it has touch to focus on the screen, which means that if you're trying to find your focus in a pinch, you can just press the screen on your point of focus and it will do its best to focus in on that point. Again, a lot of older cameras don't have this, so it's just a nice little extra feature that they've included with this camera. Now, unfortunately, these touchscreen capabilities don't work on the menus, which I can't really understand why. It isn't a deal breaker. It would have been nice because clearly the screen is capable of being touchscreen, but is worth bearing in mind if you're confused why you can't press the screen to move around the menus. It just doesn't work. Talking again of the focus on the a5100, it has 179 focus points for autofocusing, which is pretty decent. The focus is quite fast and snappy, you can move in and out, and focus will generally be retained pretty well. Compared to new cameras which have a lot more focus points and can get that focus much quicker and smoother, you may see the difference, but for most use cases, the autofocus on the a5100 is still good. It has auto face detection, which is great for just keeping track of faces in a crowd when taking video, or just looking at keeping yourself in focus while recording yourself for YouTube and vlogs. And it does also have eye autofocus, which is an extra function, which means that you can focus directly on the eye, which is probably the best point of focus when taking photos or videos of someone's face. And unfortunately, a feature which it doesn't have is animal eye AF, which does exactly that. It's great at capturing the focus of an animal's eye, which is perfect for pet or even wildlife photography. Now, this is a newer feature, so probably not expected of a camera this age, but worth bearing in mind that it might not be the ideal camera for wildlife or pet photography, though I've had pretty decent results with both. The A5100 does support burst shooting, meaning that you can shoot in bursts of 6 shots per second, which isn't the quickest, but it's still a nice feature to have. It also has a max ISO of 25,600, which means you can brighten up your images a fair amount in camera. Just be aware that this will add extra noise to your shots if you are bumping the ISO up that high. Now let's talk about a very important aspect of buying the A5100, and that is the price. Brand new, this camera will still be listed at around £350, $400. But the reason why this camera is still such a great deal in 2021 is its second-hand price. For around £250, $250, you should be able to pick up this camera with the kit lens included, making it a lot cheaper than comparable cameras on the market. So the Sony A5100 is a small form factor mirrorless camera with interchangeable lenses and good picture quality for both photos and videos. And probably most importantly, comes in at a very reasonable price. Yes, it is starting to show its age with no 4K or 120 frames per second video support, and it has no EVF and other features such as no audio jack included, where they are things that you would start to expect. But it has good plus points in terms of its size, picture quality, and its interchangeable lens system. And for me, it's a great beginner to intermediary level camera. I've been using the A5100 for 4 years, as I mentioned before, and I still use it a lot. I'm using it to record this video here, and I use it still for a lot of my YouTube videos. I still use it for photography and video work outside. There is a lot that you can achieve with this camera with a bit of practice. I'd recommend this camera for people getting into photography, improving their YouTube videos and vlogs, or as a compact travel camera, or even as a live streaming camera. And for more tips and tricks, I've got a playlist of videos about this, which you can check out here. And if you've enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a like on the video. And if you want to check out any of my photography, you can find it on Instagram at aaron.prescott. But that's it from me for now. Until next time, see ya.